My name is Adam Kokesh. I served as a sergeant on a Marine Corps Civil Affairs team in the Fallujah area from February to September of 2004. And I actually volunteered to go to Iraq. I was a reservist in an artillery unit. And when I found out my unit was getting called up, I decided I didn't want to miss the party. So I found out that a civil affairs group at Camp Pendleton was looking for volunteers. And so I went out of my way to volunteer for that. And I was against the war before the war, even believing all of the lies that were told by Colin Powell at the UN, believing all of the intelligence, believing all the spin. I didn't think it was going to be worth it. But I thought that afterwards what we were doing was cleaning up our mess and really responsible foreign policy and genuinely trying to do good by the Iraqi people, and that was something I wanted to be a part of and something that I enthusiastically risked my life for. This is the rules of engagement card that I was issued for our deployment to Iraq, and this is held up as the gold standard of conduct in the occupation right now, and they couldn't even cut it square. But I'll just read a part of it. It says, "Nothing on this card prevents you from using deadly force to defend yourself. Enemy military and paramilitary forces may be attacked subject to the following instructions. Positive identification is required prior to engagement. Positive identification is reasonable certainty," and that's in quotes on the card, "that your target is a legitimate military target." And of course, we were supposed to keep this in our breast pocket here. But when Marines are put in a situation where they receive fire and all they see is a muzzle flash coming from a building, and they don't have positive identification, but they know that if they return fire through that window or towards that building, that they're more likely to live through whatever's going on. It's a really difficult situation, and I think it's criminal to put such patriotic Americans who have sworn an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States of America in a situation where their morals are at odds with their survival instincts. So my civil affairs team was attached to Gulf Company, 2nd Battalion, 1st Marine Regiment for part of the time we were there. And we were at Rock Ammo Supply Point between the city of Fallujah and Camp Taqadum. And we were there as a civil affairs team supporting this infantry company. And we got an order to pack for 3 days and have our vehicle in a convoy ready to go at midnight. We weren't told where we were going. This was in April of 2004, right after the 4 Blackwater security agents were killed and had their bodies burned and strung up over the northern bridge over the Euphrates on the western side of Fallujah. And they said pack for 3 days. And we were going to put up the blocking position on the peninsula on the western part of the city. And if they had just told us that before we got our convoy brief, we would have known to pack for more than 3 days. But during the siege of Fallujah, we changed rules of engagement more often than we changed our underwear. At first it was, you follow the rules of engagement, you do what you're supposed to do, and then there were times when it was you can shoot any suspicious observer, so someone with binoculars and a cell phone was fair game. And that really opened things up to a lot of subjectivity. But also firing at muzzle flashes into the city, firing Mark 19s into the city became common practice. And at one point, we imposed a curfew on the city of Fallujah, and at that point, we were told we were allowed to shoot anything after dark. And fortunately, I was never put in that situation to make that decision, but there were a lot of Marines, on the positions around me who were forced to make those choices. And in one incident, in the first couple of days we were there was a checkpoint shooting to the west of our perimeter. The first picture, please. This is a vehicle that was approaching a SNAP VCP, or an impromptu vehicle checkpoint. We were told at a higher rate of speed that gave the Marines manning that checkpoint enough cause to be suspicious, and they unloaded into that vehicle with a .50 caliber machine gun. And I mean, the idea is that anybody coming at your position who doesn't slow down to 5 miles an hour has to be an enemy combatant. Well, this was at dusk, and Marines are all wearing camouflage, and this guy could just be cruising through his neighborhood. We'd only been there for a couple of days, rushing home to see his family. We didn't know, but it was enough that the Marines got jumpy, and they shot a burst of .50 cal rounds into this vehicle. Next slide, please. And so the bullets started at the bumper and went up through the engine compartment, and then one round at least hit this Iraqi in the chest so hard that it broke his chair backwards. And we saw the vehicle burning in the distance. And of course, a vehicle that's caught on fire is going to make some noise, but everybody tried to justify and said, oh, they heard rounds cooking off, as in from the fire. AK-47 rounds were bursting in the trunk or somewhere in the car. And they dragged the car into the area where we were sleeping the next day. And we didn't even question that, but it was clear that there were no rounds or holes from rounds that were cooking off in the side of this car. And next slide, please. This is me posing on the hood of that car. And as was alluded to earlier, it felt funny because, not because what we were doing was morally wrong, but because I wasn't the one that killed this guy. And there was a group of us Marines that all took turns taking pictures and posing like this. And at the first Winter Soldier in 1971, one of the testifiers showed a similar picture and said, "Don't ever let your government do this to you." And still, our government is doing this to patriotic young men and women of this country who have volunteered their lives in the service of this country, and putting them in a situation where this kind of thing is normal. Next slide, please. During the siege of Fallujah, there were a couple ceasefires, adding to the confusion over rules of engagement, but at one point we decided that we were going to let out women and children from the city. And we thought it was the most gracious thing we could have done. And I went out on the bridge. This is the northern bridge over the Euphrates on the western side of Fallujah. And our guideline was, for males, you know, they had to be under 14. If they were old enough to be in your fighting hole, they were too old to get out of the city. So I had to go there and turn these men back. That's what we've seen in this picture. There's two Marines guarding the position on the bridge and turning away some of the civilians who had just been separated from their wives and children, who we sent across the street. We didn't have any plan for them. It was just, hey, there's a mosque down the road, good luck. And we thought that we were doing something really noble and gracious with that. And it took me a long time before I could step back and think about it, you know, and what a horrible situation and decision we were forcing these families to make. You could split up and leave your husband and your older sons in the city and let them, you know, hope they don't, a Spectre gunship round doesn't land on their head, or stay with them and hunker down and just hope that you make it through alive. So after the siege of Fallujah, my team, as a civil affairs team, was pulled to set up a civil military operations center, or CMOC, outside the city of Fallujah, 2 clicks east of the city. And my role there was manning the front checkpoint, because we didn't have enough translators, and I was learning Arabic, and I spoke enough to run a checkpoint without a translator. So we also had an Iraqi cop on duty 24 hours a day. It was supposed to be a liaison between the American forces and the Iraqi forces. And we were still putting down Spectre gunship rounds into the city during the siege. And apparently one night, some of those rounds started a fire, not surprisingly. And there were a number of firefighters and policemen responding to the scene. And so they went out, and they were then silhouetted against the fire between the Marines on the peninsula where I had just been and that fire. And so since those Marines' rules of engagement at the time were to shoot anything after dark, they started firing into these Iraqi firefighters and policemen. And about the situation being criminal, about the criminality of putting Marines in this position, because when you tell them that the rules of engagement are you can shoot anything that moves after dark, we have a reasonable certainty based on our intelligence or whatever that anything that moves after dark is an enemy combatant. Well, you can't expect those Marines to stop and analyze every situation, because they're going to operate based on those rules of engagement, and they're going to do what they have to do. So I got up in the middle of the night when the Iraqi policeman at our checkpoint got the call, and through pointing and pantomime and the little Arabic I spoke at the time and an Arabic translation dictionary, I was able to help figure out that there were Marines shooting at Iraqi firefighters and cops, and we were able to send it down our chain of command and stop that from happening. But you know, how many incidents like that happened where it wasn't so clear and there were just shadows being shot at? And I know that, you know, that happened while I was there during the siege of Fallujah.